Hi, everyone, and welcome. So happy you could join us tonight. Just going to give it another minute to allow some people to join in, but we are excited to be offering this webinar this evening about exceptionalities outdoors. And we've got Margaret joining us and Thomas, and I'll give them a bit of an intro in a moment. So I'm just going to give it another minute or so because I can see people are joining right now. Yes, and hopefully the weather's nice where you are all across Canada. It's a bit kind of bleak here in Ottawa, but oh well, waiting for the snow. Looking forward to the snow so we can get outside and do some stuff. All right. Okay, so I would like to welcome you again. So happy you could join us here. And my name is Robin McMillan. I'm from the Canadian Childcare Federation, and I'm the innovator of projects, programs, and partnerships here at the Federation. And I'm so pleased to be joining our great presenters today at the Child and Nature Alliance of Canada to be offering this webinar to you. I first want to start off by doing a land recognition on behalf of the Canadian Childcare Federation. We respectfully acknowledge that the land on which the CCCF is located is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. We recognize all Indigenous people who are here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As Indigenous people, we have done since time immemorial. We strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds to the past, we commit ourselves to working in a spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for all. Today, these lands continue to be shared territory and are occupied by many diverse peoples from near and far. A treaty is an inheritance, a responsibility, and a relationship. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So I wanted to give you a few little tips about how we're going to be running this tonight. We have our wonderful presenters there, and we want to encourage any kind of hellos or questions you may have to be put in the question box that you'll see on the side of your screen. And what I will do is I will monitor those questions, and at the end of the presentation, I'm going to throw some of those questions out to our presenters. So I'll keep a note of that, and certainly if you have any technical issues, highlight them there, and we can address them as we go along as well. And a note that everyone is muted, just to make it easier so we're not hearing everyone's background noises through the presentation. And I think that was it for logistics. I'm going to come on at the end too and give you an idea of what we're going to do for follow-up. So with no further wait, I'm going to introduce you to our wonderful presenters. So first we have Margaret Fraser. A longtime advocate, Margaret founded The Lion and the Mouse, where she developed and led innovative child-centered urban outdoor play programs from 2013 to spring 2022. She now supports play and child-centered participatory practices in municipal planning through her work with Metalude. She also facilitates learning among forced preschool practitioners with the Child and Nature Alliance of Canada. Margaret's work benefits from her academic background in community, economic development, organizational development, and critical disability studies. So welcome, Margaret. And I also want to welcome her colleague, Sayun Thomas Henderson, is the Director of Innovation at Giant Steps Montreal and has worked in the area of education and inclusion for over 30 years. He is an experienced educator and administrator of programs for children, youth, teens, and adults with and without disabilities, with a particular focus on the autism community. He is also a Zen Buddhist monk. He is passionate about nature and the four-school approach, play-based learning, outdoor education, and environmentalism. So welcome, Margaret and Thomas, and we're so pleased to be offering this amazing webinar in partnership with the Child and Nature Alliance of Canada, and I'll turn it over to you, and that I will appear magically at the end.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robin. I'm so happy to be able to participate again. In case you missed them before, there are a couple of other webinars that have been a part of this great collaboration between the Child Nature Alliance of Canada and the Canadian Childcare Federation. I'm sure they're available on the CCCF's YouTube channel if ever you're curious to go find out more. So tonight we are talking about exceptionalities outdoors, and we're going to talk a little bit more about words and languages we use to talk about things in a minute. But before we dig into the meat of why we're here, I'd like to take a moment here just to explain who each of these partners are who have brought us together tonight. So I'm here with CNAC, and I have a little something I'd like to read. At CNAC, we've been doing a lot of work trying to in our efforts to decolonize our practice of forest school. So I'd like to read directly this text that's really shows the work that we've been doing and our intentions moving forwards. So the relationship with the land is the heart of what we do, and this land is Indigenous land. But the origins of the Child and Nature Alliance of Canada and Forest School Canada are rooted in white settler thinking and approaches. We are an organization currently led by white settlers, headquartered on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe. We have imposed a settler colonial way of being with the land because our programs were not co-created with Indigenous people. This approach means we perpetuate and benefit from colonization in the ways that we operate, and this causes harm. We want to repair our relationships with the Indigenous communities and people we have harmed, and, if they are willing, work towards co-creating trusting, safe, and reciprocal relationships with them. From that place of reciprocity, we hope to recreate the Forest and Nature School Practitioners course and co-create all future programming with Indigenous partners across Canada. In doing that, we hope that Indigenous and Western worldviews will have equitable voice and space in our programs, so they are safe, meaningful, and culturally relevant for all participants. And in case you heard of this evening through CNAC and are wondering who exactly CCCF is, well, it's a community in the early learning and childcare sector in Canada. Professionals and practitioners from coast to coast belong to this community. They give a voice to the deep passion, experience, and practice of early learning and childcare in Canada, and give space to excellent research and policy and practice to better inform service development and delivery. They provide leadership on issues that impact the sector because they know they are making a difference in the lives of young children. The true purpose and why CCCF exists, to make a difference in these lives. What gets talked about, explored, shared in this community is always a life changer, and they know it. They're a committed, passionate force for positive change where it matters most, with children. So thank you so much for joining us in this big way. Before I move forward into this evening with you, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that I am on unceded Indigenous land. I'm speaking to you from Tiohtià:ke, also known as Montreal. I recognize the Giningahaga as the guardians, custodians of the land where I am, the waters that are around me, and that this island of Montreal has been and continues to be an important meeting place for Indigenous people. And I know Thomas also wanted to share a little bit about where he is speaking to you from, so I'd like to invite him to do that as well.
Thanks, Margaret. And yes, so the Forest School programs that I'm going to be talking to you about tonight did take place on the island of Montreal, but I'm currently joining you actually from Central Colombia in South America. So I'm in the foothills of the Central Cordillera of the Andes, and this is the traditionally land inhabited by the Quimbaya Nation, who are now extinct. So the Embera-Chami are the Indigenous peoples that are displaced, but are currently the Indigenous peoples living on the land here, but it's traditionally the Quimbaya Nation that was here, and they are unfortunately extinct.
So I'd like to ask you, Thomas, to take a minute now and speak to us, just share a little bit about the school and organization behind the project, your Forest School project we're going to talk about tonight that you're involved in.
Sure, happily. So Giant Steps is well, first and foremost, a school. So you see in the description here that we have preschool, elementary school, and high school programs. So specifically for students on the autism spectrum, so autistic kids and teens. More recently, in the past 7 or 8 years, we've actually been more and more offering services as well to adults. So those include adult education as well as employment supports. But we are, we were founded in 1980. So at the time, we were one of the first autism-specific schools that was developed worldwide, and the model that was developed in Montreal was replicated around the world. So there's Giant Steps that exist across Canada and the US, Australia, and Tasmania. But the program and the approach was, fundamentally based on the idea of inclusion. So even back in the 80s, when autism was little understood, as well as inclusion was barely talked about. I think we were sort of leading the way in the ways that we were collaborating, both in offering specialized services, but also access to taking part, for example, in community school programs and so on. So we have a kind of a mixed approach that I think is unique. We also have a community outreach center, so a community supports network and center that offers training, consultation, those types of things, as well as a research and innovation hub. So the Forest School piece of Giant Steps is actually relatively new. I've worked at Giant Steps on and off for 30-ish years. So I've been there for a while. And I've done, I've had a variety of different roles. I've been, a long advocate for outdoor education and have been involved in outdoor education in different ways, but formally launching a forest and nature school program through Giant Steps is relatively recent. In my past role, I was the Director General, so I was busy, and I changed actually roles. One of the motivations was to be able to do more of this type of work that I was so excited and passionate about. So we launched 3 years ago a pilot project where we started taking our class once a week out to the forest and doing a forest school with our students. And then last summer launched for the first time a summer forest and nature school program in Montreal. So that was a fairly recent but very exciting initiative.
Thank you. I can attest to it being wonderful. My own kids were in Thomas's summer program and they just absolutely loved it.
Loved having them.
So as Robin had mentioned earlier, I spent nearly 10 years founding and running The Lion and the Mouse. I realized here, because we work in French, that I've given you the mission and vision in French. My apologies. In English, it's facilitating, promoting, protecting spaces, or the children's outdoor free play, and recognizing it as a fundamental right, even in the city. And the vision being that every child in Montreal plays outside every day. And the values that guide this work are respect, empowerment, and accessibility. And through the course of this work, of my work there, in the first while, we met a lot of parents who were choosing forest school, homeschooling, alternative preschool, forest school settings with us because they felt that there was something in more traditional education structures that didn't fit for their child. And so over time, we had the great privilege of really getting to know these kids and also understanding that sometimes there are additional supports that can really be beneficial to giving someone full access to the experience. And I've worked with parents who have are all over the map on how they feel about talking about this, what language they use when they're talking about this, about simply the idea that supports and access needs exist and that they can be good, and that talking about them, all it can do for us here is really make it be a more inclusive program for all the children to find their place. And in our programs, they're mixed program with general registration. Anyone can come, and children who identify as having disabilities or having functional limitations or additional access needs can benefit from a shadow program that we put in place. We were able to have additional people at no cost to parents who would provide additional supports. For example, we could have an extra person. We had children who had motor disabilities who wouldn't be able to move necessarily at a speed of the whole group, or that the group otherwise would move that. And so we would have a shadow in place. And what I think was interesting in our approach is the role of the shadow is not to help the person with access needs become like the others. The role of the shadow is very much to hold space for that person to participate fully in the program. And sometimes that takes the form of slowing down the others and saying, we're going to move together. We're going to find ways to play where everyone is a part of it. And so a lot of the work that we did with our shadows was not just in learning how to support people with disabilities, but also in learning how to hold conversations with non-disabled people to help them understand the power that they hold in making these shared spaces accessible or not to the children who are around them. So that's a little bit about my experience that leads me here now to be talking to you in the form of this webinar. As we were preparing, Thomas and I were talking a bit about the massive amount of language that exists, so many different words that people can use to describe different experiences in their minds, in their bodies. And I came across this image that I thought was very powerful, and that would maybe give you some context for the ways that we will be speaking about autism this evening and autistic people. So just to give you the sense here, we have this idea of suffers from autism. We see a full-on knife in someone's head. This is clearly far from a positive image of an autistic person that we're portraying here with this language. You can also talk about on the spectrum, which you see is it's a bit comical in this image of being on top of it, literally. A person with autism being, there's a person primarily who is moving through this world carrying something called autism. And then this choice to use the term autistic person, or sometimes people will say autistic, just really recognizing that the experience of autism is at the heart of who that person is as well. So that was that image I wanted to share with you. Thomas, I invite you to jump in at any point if you have any
maybe
thoughts.
just some some context about that, and it's something that's shifted a lot over time, and it's still it's still often debated. And I think ultimately the best thing is to go with what people themselves actually the way that they would want to be referred to. And most of the autism community does choose to identity first language, but ultimately you should always check in with people. But just to give some kind of maybe links to the way that we talk about other disabilities or other things that can marginalize people as well, in the same way that you wouldn't say a person with deafness, for deaf people, that is a part of who they are, and so they are a deaf person. I'm a gay man, I'm not a man with gayness. So those things, I think, but we have those kind of different ways. We can be talking about something that's quite similar, but depending on what the thing that we're talking about is, we change how we use language. So ultimately, oh yes, I see now this is about checking in with the people. So maybe you'd like to touch base about that.
Absolutely. Well, I just bring it up. It speaks very much to what you're sharing already. It's something that I found really interesting, being based in a bilingual environment, is noticing also the way that the language we're speaking changes the way that people tend to understand identities. So in French, we often speak about people in a situation of disability, which comes from a social model, but it comes from the idea that the disability is created by the situation. So to take a very blatant example, you would say a person who is able to move in their life as they need to in a wheelchair, if they're in a space where they truly can move in and out of all the spaces that they need to and want to in their life, it's not necessarily in those moments in a situation of disability, but the moment that they come to a place that they want to go inside of that has stairs, that disability is right there in the face. So that's just an example of the complexity of language. I think that those language choices, they shift over time with theories, with how we look at things, or the research, the academic thought that's built around it, but also with personal situation, and with our that idea of identity that people build over time. And of course, the best thing is always just to ask people, what language do you prefer? And I really appreciated it in this little extract I found, and I put the link there, considering it can be likened to asking the correct pronunciation of someone's name or their preferred pronouns. How do you see yourself? Then that's the right way for you to be seen by others. The people, as Thomas mentioned, a lot of the people that we work with in our lives do choose language that is identity first, and so that's the language that we're most likely to be using as we talk through this webinar.
If I can interject too, And I think it's also interesting, when we're working with young children as well, that, often the diagnosis may not have been disclosed to them, or that, the conversations may not have happened, in the family yet, or they may not even be diagnosed at that point. But, it's also interesting, depending on the age of the kids, to have conversation about access and about inclusion and support needs and so on, outside of any kind of concept or discussion of diagnosis or disability or autism or whatever it is. But I think there's also ways to approach it that really are just about access and inclusion and participation and engagement that kind of are outside of that, especially with younger kids.
Absolutely. I know plenty of kids who have, we'd say let's say like, my brain needs glasses. I know kids who really identify with that idea, and things of like, sometimes there's a traffic jam and I just need a minute to find the right route. That's another sort of image I've heard children speak to just describe what's happening for them. And it doesn't need diagnosis or any of that, like you're saying. Very much at their level, which I think is a lovely way to look at things. So in previous webinars, we've talked a bit about the why of Forest School. It's something that we can talk about for hours and hours and hours. But in this context, I wanted to actually bring out this little quote from Thomas. I'm sorry if this is a little silly for me to quote you in a webinar you're part of, but I thought this was really powerful. The Forest School educational model challenges the conventional concepts of education and advocates for child-led and explorative learning outdoors. Henderson observed this is particularly valuable for autistic youth who tend to be overprotected and thereby lose out on many formative experiences. What I found really powerful reading this myself was that it is not because they are autistic that they need this, that they need to be in contact with nature to change something about who they are. But in this sense, we're seeing, because they are autistic, people are preventing them. There's that overprotection that comes from the people that's preventing those formative experiences. And so by creating accessible and inclusive programs, we open up that world to risk and play and inquiry that we're already understanding have valuable for all children. And so looking at our role as understanding that those experiences are valuable for everyone. And we have a role in planning our programs and inviting people to join us in a way where we're not categorizing them and saying, okay, but you actually need something different and therefore I can't welcome you here, because everybody needs to be welcomed in these spaces.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Margaret. Certainly, I think we all know that this, or I know that this approach is powerful for all kids. I think there is some conversation that we could have about specific benefits, for kids, autistic kids or kids that have other challenges or access needs. But, ultimately, I do think, and we'll delve in, I'll delve into it a little bit deeper when I talk about risky play, certainly as something, that when, it was really, really kind of stunning to see in the program that we ran last summer, how freeing it was to finally have access to, experiences where they could use fire, right? I mean, they've been told their whole life just fire is dangerous, but never had any access to even try to start a fire, right? So that, it really changes the child's ability to understand and actually learn in those experiences, as opposed to, just being told that fire is dangerous, and which might, I think is the kind of the standard approach probably for kids, certainly with intellectual disabilities. And, so it was incredibly freeing. Yeah.
I brought up your lovely images of you with the fire here for everyone to see just exactly what
Yeah, so those are
look
our
like?
two of our Flint masters that were determined over the course of their time in the program to master the use of the Flint and start our little mini. We were doing we called them fairy fires because we were in an urban park, so we were in the city of Montreal, not allowed to make a full campfire, but actually each Friday we went out of the city and made a big fire. But day to day we practiced a lot making fire, and it was probably one of the activities that was most popular, certainly, but it was like a marvel, right? I mean, these kids had just never, like, it was like, what? You're giving me fire. And so yeah, I think it was incredibly liberating and of course a deep learning experience, but just being given that access and that opportunity was in and of itself transformative. So you went by a couple of pictures that maybe I could
Let's go back to them. I couldn't resist showing the fire as you spoke of it.
Well, those, yeah, there they are. Those two were the masters of the flints, and went out and got their own flints after I think the first day or the first 2 days. They both showed up back to camp with their own flints so they could practice at home and so on. But yeah, it was incredible. And I think the whole idea of risky play is a huge part of why I think there are probably some particular benefits for neurodivergent or autistic youth in participating in these types of programs. So you guys can see maybe just a bit of kind of information about the program that we ran. So it was a program that was primarily for autistic youth. So we had different age groups. We had 4 to 6 year olds, 6 to 12, and then actually teens to young adults as well. So we even had some participants in their 20s join us for one of the weeks. It took place in Angrignon Park, which is an urban park in the center of Montreal, but with a actually beautiful forest. Maybe some other things about the kind of the organization of it. So it was certainly, it was designed, with autistic participants in mind, but it was inclusive in the sense that the kids would come with their siblings, parents, anyone else that actually wanted to accompany them could come. We also were very intentional in that we hired staff on the spectrum as well to be supporting in that environment. So we had staff as well as some teen mentors that joined. So the boy in the front on the right is a ex-Giant Steps student who transitioned out of Giant Steps but came back to kind of volunteer and be a mentor in the program. On the left is Kevin Deere. He's an elder from Ganawage that came once a week and did a variety of kind of ceremony and teaching, certainly a land acknowledgement, but he really took time each week to spend with the kids and tell stories and show ceremony and teach. And I think it was incredible because we did it on the Monday of each week, and the facilitators, most of the staff that were working in the program were people that have worked most of their career in special education or in supporting kids with support needs, and a lot of them specifically with kids, autistic kids. And right from the bat, I saw it in their faces because Kevin came in and he had, his drums and so on, and just started talking and sharing and teaching. And, I could see right away that their first reaction was like, oh, the kids are not going to be interested or able to access this kind of level of kind of verbal language and talking but it was incredible to see that, in fact, quite the opposite. The kids absolutely loved every aspect of Kevin's participation in camp. So it was a very, very valuable collaboration, and it was wonderful to have him with us. Yeah, the next picture I think is the one of just of the little flags that I think is a very simple but an interesting kind of introduction to the idea of accessibility and adaptation of the ways that we're thinking about programming. We'll dive much deeper into some of that stuff, but you see the flags there. So their primary function was actually just, we had a base camp, so we every day, and I think it's probably a lot of but one of the tenets of Forest School is that it's place-based. So you go back to the same spot over and over to allow kids to get to know that space, to connect with it, to start to steward that particular piece of land. So we would hang those flags every morning. but also as a visual reference point. So if kids were navigating and starting to expand out a little bit further away from base camp, that they could always visually refer back and see where base camp was. We had a variety of systems for establishing perimeters and establishing calls to come back to base camp and so on. And I'll talk a little bit more about safety and risk and those things later, but it was a visual representation of some of the ways that we were thinking about access from the very beginning, even in terms of how we set up at camp. You could maybe skip up to, there's a couple more pictures that might be kind of interesting for me to tell a few stories about. There's one, yeah, that one is maybe good. I think it gives me some ideas about, the idea of kind of how you are listening to kids and coming up with in the forest with ideas for ensuring access. The boy that was in the hammock, I'll call him John, it was interesting because from day one, he'd never been in any type of program like that. And in fact, it had kind of been determined by the people that were supporting him day to day that he absolutely required a highly structured and controlled environment. So, where everything was extraordinarily planned out down to the last minute. And, he was also in very controlled kind of physical environments where, there were, it was fairly simple space and things were presented in very structured ways. And, that's kind of one of the things that we often think about when we talk about planning for autistic learners. We think about the idea of like needing all this structure and so on. And so it was a totally new experience for him. And we had a variety of activities that happened throughout the day. So sometimes we would come together for some sort of group activities or song or those kinds of things. And it was really tough for him to be in that kind of space where there were a lot of kids. There was also a lot of movement around him. It was already, we're in a kind of a very rich sensory environment, but it was pretty tough for him to be there. He also had fairly significant sort of sensory needs. So, had needed a lot of sensory stimulation. So day 2, we brought the hammock, and with the, our thinking about the hammock was actually just to kind of provide a retreat space, so a space where he could go and kind of close off. And also get some vestibular and proprioceptive kind of feedback by swinging, and he loved that. And he was very happy in the hammock. So that was our kind of intention at the first day that we put it in place. But what we noticed right away was that he would go there right away when we started doing any sort of group activity, right? So we would come together in the, for circle and singing and those kinds of things. He would head straight for the hammock, which was just off to the side. But what happened, which was amazing, because he wanted nothing to do with singing the songs or participating in the, the kind of questions and, conversation and so on. But from the hammock, all of a sudden, every time his name would be said, his head would pop up and he would answer the question or join the song and so on. So, it provided access to him in ways that we certainly hadn't anticipated. But by, kind of working with him and playing and seeing how we could, kind of accommodate, he was able to participate fully and absolutely loved it. One could have thought that he just didn't want to participate in the group activities, right? So that would have been maybe the first reflex, but that wasn't the reality at all. He just couldn't do it from within that space with that many kids around that were moving around and so on. So from the hammock, he was perfectly happy to participate and able to participate. And the other picture of the girl on my back, she was, also a kid where she didn't, she wasn't autistic. She had a different disability that had both significant motor challenges, but also very, very significant health support needs, so in terms of feeding and those kinds of things. So had a conversation with her mom at the beginning, and mom was keen for her to participate in forest school. She didn't think her daughter would necessarily be keen on it, based on the fact that she had a fair amount of trouble walking, and certainly hiking or doing any kind of distance was tough, and needed medical support also throughout the day. So but together we figured out ways to do it, and this was one of the ways, was that when it was hike time, we had a variety of people that helped carry her on our backs. She was keen to take part in the hikes, but couldn't do the whole hike. She would do a little bit on her own, and then would hop up on our backs again. And mom actually came to camp to help support with her more specialized health support needs. But you know, I think if there's a will, you can figure out a way for any kid to participate and have access to all of the activities in that type of program.
Absolutely. That hearing you speak about carrying her is making me think too of, in the past, I've used a lot of wagons to carry backpacks. And so the primary use of the wagon, as far as everyone in the group is concerned, is to carry the backpacks. But every once in a while, anyone might need a break. And so it's made for a really great plan B when we know there's someone who may fatigue more quickly than others. And we've had kids who simply want to have a turn. So it's something I've used in the past, is that plan B. And of course,
Right.
knowing that many people can be involved in carrying, I'm sure is a great help as well.
Mm-hmm. I think on the next slide, Margaret, there's some pictures of some kind of visual supports, and it's something that we talked a bit about when we met before tonight. So the picture on the right there is me poorly playing the ukulele and poorly singing. But you know, so when we were doing these kind of, or thinking about the group kind of time when we would have kids come together, and we had a lot of kids that were non-speaking. So you know, we were always thinking about supporting their communication needs. So we had kids with iPads and so on for communication supports, and that was fine. But you know, we were also thinking about how can we provide access, for example, so that when I'm singing that song, that was something that we did at the end of each day, which was a form of a gratitude practice that we did. So we wanted to do some thanking, you know, so we wanted to thank, you know, the land and the parts of the land and the earth that we were particularly thankful to that day. But then we kind of dive a little bit deeper into what that meant for the kids and so on. They could also be thankful for activities or things that they had experienced during the day. But we were conscious to provide visual support so that, you know, the non-speaking kids could participate. But what was, I think, most interesting for me was that, you know, it really started to break down and demonstrate that, you know, kids that are non-speaking, for example, and use communication systems, augmentative communication systems to support them in their communication needs, you know, they are often stuck in these, you know, requesting what they want, and you know, they're fairly controlled systems, right? So what was interesting in this context was we were involving them in communicating in ways that they had never had the opportunity to. So, you know, what were they thankful for, and being able to thank the sun and the flowers and the birds and those things was I think, again, a very new and powerful and transformative experience for them. The boy in the middle, what he's doing there is digging. He was well, you can see his name, Louis Philippe. He fabulous kid. He was actually the kid that when we were lighting fires, every time he was fascinated by it, but he would always say, "C'est très dangereux." It's very, very dangerous. So you know, he'd been told so many times that every time he hit the flint, he had to say it's dangerous, but was thrilled to be doing it. Very, very happy to be digging. It was one of his favorite things. He loved the sensory kind of input he got from getting his hands in the dirt. We were always trying to mitigate, you know, the kind of environmental impacts of that. So we had a kind of a dig zone that was his zone to get really dirty and to dig as much as he wanted. One of the things that makes me think about was we had in the same group, we had another kid that absolutely hated the idea of getting dirty. So, you know, you know, that's not uncommon for autistic kids to, you know, have significant, you know, have real problems with, for example, mud on their hands, and can't tolerate it. And for this boy, he actually, the problem was his shoes. He could not tolerate the idea that there would be dirt on the bottom or sides of his shoes. And so, you know, he was just stuck. He didn't know how to participate. We didn't know how to get him into the forest. He also had a fear of birds. So, you know, there was some issues dealing with the sounds of birds and so on, but he quickly figured out with his parents a really cool solution, which was that he was used to his winter boots getting dirty because they necessarily get muddy and wet or wet and slushy during the winter. So he in fact didn't have a problem with his winter boots getting dirty. So when coming into the forest from the more kind of the flatter zones where he would put his shoes on and where we would go out to the grassy areas, he was fine. But when we're anywhere where there was the chance that they would get dirty, he would just change into his boots and everything was golden, So you have to be creative. You have to listen to the kids, and but I think there's always a way to figure out, because I think the reflex could just be to say, the forest school isn't for him, right? He hates getting dirty. He doesn't like birds. It's not going to work. It's not a good fit, right? But I don't think that's true for any kid. I think it's always a good fit. I think all kids, like we said at the beginning, can benefit from and love being in nature. It's just a question of access and so on. Sorry, another thought that came to me is that one of the other things that we often think about when we're thinking about planning programs for autistic youth is that they necessarily should be highly structured, right? So this idea that you have a visual schedule and there can be no deviation from that, and to a certain extent that is true. So there is in predictability and having structure that is reassuring and comforting, and so change can be difficult as well for kids on the spectrum. But I think there is a way to find a really great balance where you allow for freedom and choice and self-determination and full participation and exploration. But having, for example, what we did was we had these we had something we called the Magic Flame, which was this little kind of rechargeable electric candle thing that we would pass around, and we would do these little check-ins. So we did have a routine. It was predictable, but within that there was a ton of space for moving outside of that and exploring and so on. So I think it's it's a question of also thinking creatively and not just thinking forest school is not good for autistic kids because they like highly structured activities, and forest school is by definition a kind of free and explorative kind of approach.
Absolutely, that certain elements as the routine is something that I've also had to bring in as well, and notice that all children can really benefit from that, knowing when your basic needs will be met, knowing when you're going to have the chance to go to the bathroom, knowing when you're going to get to eat, knowing when your parents are coming. And so if we can just expand our minds to think, well, of course everybody wants to know when snack is, and of course everybody needs to know where the bathroom is, and to be able to expand our understanding of, well, what might a basic need be for this child, to be able to say, what might they need to know? For them to feel safe and able to be part of it.
Yeah, and to be able to predict, what's, that there is, there is a plan, and I think having also, the kind of repetitive structure for all kids again, but certainly for autistic kids, is very, comforting to know that there is a sequence of things, but within that they can choose and be free. And, the first day, I think in particular of the first day, are you guys hearing me still? Do you still hear me, Margaret?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Oh, good. Your image froze, so I was worried that I had frozen. Actually, it was with the teen group, so the teen and young adult group. And the first day they came into camp, and these were students. A lot of them I've known them for 15 or 20 years. And a lot of them had been Giant Step students. And so the first thing that I did, and this was actually the first week of camp as well, so it was new, and they all came in, and I said, okay, you know what, let's take 30 minutes and just explore. So the staff that were working with me, we set up a perimeter and a visual perimeter and so on, and we said, okay, just go and see what you can find, explore, get to know the land a little bit. And it was incredible because they all just froze, because I honestly don't think anyone had ever said that to them before. So it took a little bit of, the staff had to come in and say, okay, let's, give a little bit of kind of guiding, guiding them into that process. But the turnaround, it was super quick, right? I mean, then, 15 minutes in, they were happily exploring, and from there on for the rest of the week, we're very, very happy to go off and find bugs and explore and do all of that stuff. But it was literally in their whole life, no one had ever said, you're free, go explore, So yeah.
I'm conscious that all of these photos have magnificent stories behind them. And I wanted to make sure we take a little minute to talk about risk, because I know you had some things you wanted to share with us around risky play and your experience incorporating this in your programs.
Yeah, I guess most of you know that risky play is kind of a central tenet to the forest school model, and that can mean different things. It certainly was probably the primary, I'd say, concern for most families as well as even the staff that were coming to support, and there was some unlearning that needed to happen there in terms of their role as a support staff, right? So they were so used to just constantly helping, supporting, being there, protecting, and so on. As often parents were with kids, and especially kids that have some motor challenges as well. So when they're navigating uneven surfaces or climbing and those kinds of things, and there's also in autism you often have kids as well, or you sometimes have kids where their sense of risk and danger are quite different than neurotypical kids, right? So they may not, they may actually be, it can take different forms, but they may be, quite cautious and fearful, or completely free to climb to the very, very top of the tree or jump straight into the lake and those things. So navigating that was a kind of a playful dance and was a learning experience for everyone, certainly the kids. But for a lot of those kids, even just the opportunity to walk along a log or climb a little bit up a tree, or even walking on uneven surfaces or running along an uneven surface, those were completely new experiences for them, right? So I think there's undoubtedly therapeutic benefits to that for all people again, but it's a question, and that's where I think the idea of support for the ability to take risks is really important. So actually the little guy on the right that you see sitting with the staff person, all of the kids love the water. We would go every afternoon we would go on a long hike, and it would end, we'd stop at the pond in the center of Angring Park and take some time just to look for turtles, and throw rocks in the water was a very, very popular one, and so on. But the little guy on the right had a much stronger desire to get right in the water, and it was strong enough that he would actually dart from camp, which was a fair way. It was actually a few kilometers from the water, but we would take off at a full tilt run, heading to the pond. And it makes me think of something, actually. I think I have a very, very dear friend and mentor named Anne Crabtree, who's a woman in her 70s who's autistic and deaf, and who is a close friend and a mentor to me. But she once explained something to me that from her experience of in autism, the whole idea of running, so that this was a risk management thing, that when we're evaluating risk, benefit and risk, the idea of kids that would run away or get lost and so on, it's a real thing that you need to kind of think about and plan and support for. But she once explained it to me, this was many years ago, that for autistic people, there can be a very, very strong running from or running to-ness to their activities. So it's often a question of either getting out of Dodge, getting away from something that's really dysregulating or upsetting for them, or a very, very strong desire to get to something. And for a number of the kids, getting to the water was pretty exciting and a pretty strong desire. So what we decided with this little guy was that, in fact, after a couple of days of really trying to manage, like, just your feet up to the, roll your pants up and just up to a certain point. At a certain point, we decided that, if he had a staff person there with him, and if mom was okay, it was okay. He would just actually get soaked, and it was okay. I mean, he wasn't swimming. We still managed to kind of balance that idea of giving him access to taking those risks and getting in the water, but in a supported way.
Sounds lovely. Like, I can feel his excitement as you talk about it.
Yeah, and then he was happy to just sit, like once he was wet, he was happy to just sit there with, with the staff and love being close to it. But, the desire to get in there was so strong that, it was really a question of access. And once the access was given and it was supported in a specific way, then he was cool to just, to sit on the side and get his pants a bit wet and so on. But yeah, so it's a game, right? It's a dance that you have to kind of figure out. I'm very fearful of heights. I have like a horrible fear of heights, right? So watching a kid, risk is also very, very subjective. So, watching a kid climb a tree for me versus for another facilitator can be a very, very different experience, and our understanding of risk in that situation can be very, very different, right? Someone that's very comfortable with tree climbing and has done it their whole lives versus me who's never gone up above branch one. Is a very different experience. So it's really a question of kind of evaluating in the situation with the kids, with the support staff and so on.
Something that is brewing in my mind as I hear you talk about this is, you said, it's a question of access, getting into that water. And I think there's that tension that can exist between, well, you're in a public park and what is socially acceptable according to all the many people who may be in this park versus what is the need of this child in this moment.
Right.
And I think it's beautiful that you found ways to say, you know what, that truly is the need in this moment. That's where he's called to go. And we found ways to come to a mutual understanding around the potential risk, and also to be with a group of people who are together and saying this is important, and we don't really care how people looking on might feel about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yes. There was one day when we got some disapproving tisking, but it's okay. Yeah.
It's one of those things that my own context experience with my children, the disapproving look at a behavior that's not doing anyone any harm, but is doing a world of good to the person who needs that right now.
Right.
Here we have some of that tree climbing you were talking about.
It didn't change on my screen. I don't know if it.
Well, I was just showing the tree pictures. I'm sorry. I'm conscious of time here, and I'm wanting to leave room for a few little questions if we have any. But one of the things that we wanted to touch on was also this idea of how you can actively go out and, well, how you can move forward with an intention of making your programs more accessible. So one of the practices is to do an access check. This can take all kinds of forms and really be adapted to the age of the people you're working with and their preferred ways of communicating. And it's something that can, when I've welcomed kids into programs, I've really loved to do this in a way before they arrive, where the children are able to be involved and say, so what are you hoping to do at camp, and what will help that happen for you? And of course, there's also space for parents to be able to share things that they feel are important. But something over the years that I learned that I really appreciated was first centering that desire and that excitement from that child, to let them share afterwards. And it's something that you could do before, and of course needs change. So doing checks regularly is a great practice. And I love Thomas's example of doing the check-ins you were saying around the candle, and I think finding a way to keep it in your routine is a great way to understand that access is an ongoing process. Nothing will ever be 100% completely accessible to everyone all the time, because, well, sometimes your needs are conflicting. Even somebody needs quiet, somebody needs to make noise right now. But by being able to be in a place where we can recognize that and do our best to be present and support each other is I think, a really great way to try to approach that work.
Yeah, and I think you
go ahead. Yeah.
You talked about that in terms of, kids that have different sort of communication needs. So, even for non-speaking kids, I think there's ways to do those check-ins, in a non-verbal way as well, or using visual supports. So I think there as well that, that often the tendency for non-speaking kids is to make assumptions about their support needs or their access needs based on either what the family has communicated or your expectations based on what you're seeing. But it's worth making the effort and taking the time to figure out a way to do those check-ins for all kids.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's something that actually in my work with the Lion and the Mouse, we ended up, it got a little bit long sometimes, but the kids really were able to sit through it. Where on our first day together at the beginning of the week of camp, we would do our introductions, and it would be name, pronoun, primary language, access needs today. It takes time, but it ended up being very fruitful in the way that kids were able to understand that a need can change from day to day, and stop making assumptions about what the other kids with them might need right now. Yeah. Something I just wanted to share before we move to questions is because I know when we say access, we often think about the ability to be present in the space. But I wanted to share this definition, the functional definition of accessibility. Particularly, this is written as it pertains to education, but it's as it pertains to every kind of activity we can undertake in life. So access it's also ability the access to acquire the same information as others, and to engage in the same interactions, and to enjoy the same services. And when we think of if there needs to be an adaptation or an accommodation made, but making sure that it happens so that there's still that substantially equivalent ease of use or being able to show up. So sometimes, as Thomas talked about, it's in how we may be communicating, having visuals, having all those things, but also making sure that we hold space for people to engage in the interactions as they need to. That makes me think back about your example of the child who just did better in the hammock. From the hammock, it worked, but not in the hammock, it doesn't. We don't need to impose that idea that listening looks like sitting in a circle. And of course, to being able to enjoy the same services. And I think what you shared with us about this program this summer is an amazing example of enjoying those ability, enjoying what it is to go outside, to be in nature, to build those relationships, and to do it in a way that makes sense for that child and that meets them where they are, and not with the intention of bringing them to an existing idea of what a good forest school looks like, but by saying forest school is going to look like what you need it to look like, and you are going to get what you need to get just from being here on the land in this group of people who are here for you as you are.
Yeah. I think, in lots of ways, that's the beauty of the forest school model, is that it is, by the way that it's structured and the foundations that it's based on is universally designed, or more universally designed than maybe most traditional educational approaches, because, it's about having, multiple different ways of engaging, of getting information, of, engaging in the activities or participating. So, by the very nature of the type of programming, I think it already allows for a lot more access than maybe most traditional educational approaches do.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know we have just a few minutes left. I want to give Robin the opportunity to pitch us any questions that may be popping up. I also have a document from CNAC supporting children when there's challenging behaviors that we'll be able to pass out to all of you. I have another document as well from the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network around supporting people when you have conflicting access needs. That may be interesting for people to carry forward with them as they think about how they can work to make their programs more accessible.
Sure, that sounds amazing. And we'll be sure to include those in the follow-up email, so everyone will get a copy of those great resources within that email. And I did see a question here I could throw to you. What do you need to create the fairy fires, and how would you recommend implementing that activity into other programs? I work at a center where we have everybody out days, and we too are very outdoor based. As much as possible, we've allowed them to use magnifying glasses in the past to try small fires in contained environments, but that had little success.
The way I do is with dryer lint. So I collect over the winter my dryer lint, and I mix a little bit of Vaseline in, and I make little balls. So if you take Vaseline and put it in the dryer lint and make balls, and then I have a little kind of cast iron kind of little pot that contains it. And then with a flint, it can still take a little while. It can take some determination, but they light fairly easily, and they actually have very pretty colors as well, because the dryer lint often contains fibers that have colors when they light. So.
Oh, very cool.
I don't know. Yeah.
There was another question about, what resources can we provide to families to understand the importance of risky play for children? Now, I know we have had whole webinars on that topic, and I know, for instance, on the Thrive Outside website that we'll put a link into in the follow-up email as well, there's specific documents about risk assessment tools and things like that. But maybe in the context of sort of the risk when you're talking about involving children who perhaps have different abilities and varying abilities, and it kind of puts another layer on it, I think, perhaps for some practitioners who aren't really sure how to approach that when there's neurodiverse children within the group.
Something that comes to mind for me about how we can help adults to see the value of it for children, be it their own children or for others, is to help those adults reconnect to a moment where they had that feeling themselves, and to know how amazing that feels. When it comes to play, when it comes to risk, imagine, that moment you moved out of your parents' house and suddenly you were allowed to do whatever you wanted on a Friday night, and all you did was eat macaroni and cheese for a week. Okay. Yeah. But wasn't that a thrilling, scary, funny feeling? And that's something we scary funny is an idea we talk about a lot with CNAC. Of it's a little bit scary, but it's a bit like, for people, it's like a roller coaster for people who like roller coasters. Okay, it's not so bad that you actually think you're in danger, but it's just enough to get you excited. And we know that zone is actually the zone of proximal development. That's where you're going to be learning, where you're going to be understanding your body, your brain, what works for you. And so for people who have a hard time sitting, watching their children experience that when they're young, I like to invite them to sit on their hands a minute and imagine how much harder it would be for their child to be going through understanding their own limits once they're teenagers. And they have a little bit of pocket money. They think that, that sort of thing. I'd much rather that children understand their own place in risk from a young age, while they still have so much support around them for helping make those decisions. So either they're going to learn it when they're young, or they're going to learn it when they're older, and you're not there to pick them up if they ask.
Exactly. There you go. Thank you. That was great. A couple more and I'll just finish it off. So at the beginning, okay, so I can answer this one. Actually, at the beginning, you mentioned that there's more webinars in this series. Yes, there is. We've done 3 in this series, and we actually did another 3 last year with CNAC as well. And all of those are available on the Canadian Childcare Federation's YouTube channel. And also I'll be putting those links in with the follow-up email. So you'll have access to all those past webinars. The only thing is, if you want the certificate of participation, you have to be watching the live webinar. So unfortunately, I can't give out certificates for the replays, but by all means, you can watch the replays, share them with your colleagues, all that kind of thing. And then there was another question. Oh, this is another one I can answer for you. As a childcare provider, we're allowed to communicate our observations to the parent when you notice signs of autism in a child. So I know from working frontline childcare as well that you can sometimes see quite clearly from your own perspective in a group if a child has what we call some red flags or some warning signs of things you want to share with a parent. Now, the only thing I'm saying is that you have to be very careful not to use terminology or diagnose yourself, because that's not your role as an educator. What your role is to perhaps suggest to the parent in a comforting way that they could seek out maybe some additional observation with another professional. But by no means are educators in a position to be diagnosing things or using terminology that they don't have the educational background to be talking about. So just a little alert there. But for sure, I mean, often we're the ones that get to see that, and we see it sometimes before a parent even. So yes, for sure, there is the opportunity to raise red flags, but please don't be diagnosing, because we don't want to go down that rabbit hole. That's not for us to do. Now, is anything else? So someone's wondering about any relevant articles. Yes, we'll include some resources within that email, so that can be shared with your colleagues as well and for yourselves to use. And I think I think that's it, actually. So what I will let you know about too is that we will be sending out, first off, thank you. Sorry, thank you, Thomas and Margaret. This has been amazing. And I really appreciate your thought and energy put into this, and giving us all of this perspective about, you know, doing this outside with children with disabilities. And I took lots of notes myself, because I think maybe what people haven't taken the time to consider is the inherent flexibility and suitability for this kind of environment for all children, including children that have exceptionalities, right? And I think something that rang really true for me as a parent of a child with some exceptionalities is that overprotection often gets in the way, you know, and I think that really spoke to me. And I think that we all, you know, try to overprotect these children as much as we can, but that's not really doing them a service at the end of the day. So I think we need to kind of check ourselves and what our bias is in that, and what our role is in that overprotection, and what we can do to get around that, I think is really important. So on that note, our next steps are going to be a follow-up email will be sent to everybody with, as I said, the links for the previous webinars on the YouTube channel. Hi. And also any kind of resources, additional resources that we've talked about will be in there. And also there'll be a link to a very brief, really brief evaluation survey that we would really appreciate your feedback on, so we can plan our next series of webinars. And the certificates for your participation in this webinar this evening will be an hour professional development certificate given out by organizations, and it will be sent in a separate email. So it will not be in the follow-up email. It comes in a separate email, so it'll be 2 emails essentially. And I promise those will be out within a week. So just give me a little chance to get them together, but they will be out within the week. And is there anything else, Margaret or Thomas, you want to add? I thank you so much for all this wonderful information.
Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be able to have these conversations publicly.
Exactly, amazing. And thank you, Thomas, for joining us from so far away. I mean, wow, that's impressive. Thanks so much. Thank you. That's been great. Yep. And good night to you too. Good night, so good night, everyone. And we will talk soon. There'll be more information about future webinars with CNAC and with other organizations that the Federation works with, and they'll be sent out in e-blast and posted on our Facebook page, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So keep you posted and keep on the lookout. Thanks. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.